Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, dozens are killed in Ethiopia in unrest that erupted following the killing of a popular Oromo singer earlier this week. Gunshots continue to be heard throughout the capital as the army is sent onto the streets. Also, protests are held outside of Witts University in Johannesburg by crowds objecting to the continent's first COVID-19 vaccine trials being held in the city. And Benin turned towards its troubled past as a major slave trading port. Some object to calls for sites named after slave traders to be rebranded, saying that they still play an important part in the acknowledgement of the country's history. But first, the military headed onto the streets of Addis Ababa on Wednesday on the second day of unrest that's claimed more than 80 lives. Protests broke out on Tuesday in the wake of the killing of a popular musician from the country's biggest ethnic group. The Oromo have long complained of having been politically and socially sidelined, and the fatal shooting of Hachalu Hundessa on Monday night tapped that city into violence. Gunshots continued to be heard in parts of the capital throughout the day. Maria Gerth Niculescu tells us more.
Addis Ababa, the streets are relatively empty at the moment, and people have been told to stay at home. However, in some neighborhoods, people are right now coordinating to protect their area, setting up barricades, and therefore anticipating that there might be new protests coming, maybe even during the night. This follows violent days of protests on Tuesday and Wednesday, both in the capital and in Ambo, which is the hometown of the musician Hachalu Hundessa, who was shot dead on Monday, but also in other major cities throughout the country. Clashes were reported between the police forces and the crowds. Houses, hotels, shops were widely damaged. There was also a major disagreement on where the body of the singer should be buried, and this has led to the arrest of the most prominent opposition figure, Jawar Mohammed, who is accused of organizing a kidnapping of the corpse so that it would stay in Addis Ababa. Whoever orchestrated the killing of Hachalu Hundessa knew the outcome that was to expect. He's not only a singer, but also a very influential Oromo activist. So the Oromos are the most numerous ethnic group in Ethiopia, and they have been fighting for more political recognition for years. So Hachalu Hundessa was an inspiration to many Oromos, especially to the Oromo youth, those that call themselves the Kero, and who are the majority of people that we see in the streets now protesting after his death. The incident will likely have long-lasting consequences for the country as a whole, with ethnicity already being a very sensitive issue for Ethiopian politics, and this will add fuel to the fire, although it's not yet clear who is responsible for the killing. Hachalu's funeral will be held tomorrow in his home city, so more protests are to be expected then as well.
Maria Niculescu Gerth there for us from Addis Ababa. Well, look now at some news in brief. Somalia has celebrated the 60th anniversary of its independence from Italy and the unification of former British Somaliland. To mark the day, celebrations and performances were held at the National Theatre in Mogadishu on Wednesday. President Mohamed Farmajo also attended the opening of a refurbished National Museum. Thousands of Congolese refugees fleeing clashes in the east of DR Congo are being allowed into Uganda. Kampala agreed to temporarily open borders to allow the displaced in on humanitarian grounds. The country is currently already hosting more than 1 million refugees and had closed its frontiers in March in response to the threat of coronavirus. Those being allowed in will spend 2 weeks in quarantine in an isolation centre near the Ugandan border. Those working in Zimbabwe's beleaguered tourism sector are breathing a sigh of relief upon news that the industry will be partially reopened. Restaurants will now be able to serve limited numbers of customers on site. National parks and safaris have also been reopened. The tough coronavirus lockdown brought in addition to international travel restrictions, have crippled Zimbabwe's tourism industry. The parks industry has said that it's been running at close to zero income since March. Now, a small protest was held outside of a top Johannesburg university on Wednesday against the continent's first COVID-19 vaccine trial. That began in the South African city last week and is part of one that's already being carried out in the UK. Nicola Schimmer has more.
Angry anti-vaccine protesters took to the streets and burnt face masks. Witts University in Johannesburg, in partnership with Oxford University, has rolled out South Africa's first clinical trial. The aim is to find a coronavirus vaccine. These demonstrators fear drugs will be tested on people who do not understand the risks.
It goes against all protocols. And even if people are going to consent, there has to be informed consent. It's a form of a violation of a person's body. It's a form of rape. It's not acceptable.
Among the protesters were traditional healers.
We feel that our government is not supporting traditional medicine. It's also not recognizing the work of traditional healers, because there are many things that there are many medicines that traditional healers could produce that could help with the COVID-19.
Witts University said volunteers were given an explanation about the trial and possible risks. And then they had to score 80% on a questionnaire to take part. South Africa is organising the trials because it wants the continent to have access to an affordable vaccine and not be left at the back of the queue. Scientists also say it's important that vaccines be tested in Africa to see how they perform in the local context. South Africa has the highest rate of infections on the continent, with confirmed cases at over 150,000 and more than 2,600 deaths. But it has also carried out far more tests than most African nations.
Well, during the Atlantic slave trade, at least 15 million Africans were uprooted from the continent to be forced into slavery in the Americas and the Caribbean. Benin saw more than 1 million people forcibly shipped out. Since the return of democracy to the country 30 years ago, it's been doing more to commemorate this painful part of its history. Our team reports.
Ouidah has long kept silent. The coastal city never truly faced its past as a former slave trading port. With the end of Marxism 30 years ago, Benin began acknowledging the history of previously anonymous sites. Here, the old auction market is still named after a white Brazilian who was one of the biggest slave traders of his time. More than 1 million Africans had their liberty stripped away here.
Ceux de la diaspora verront sur les lieux, voyant ce nom, Place Chacha, ils sont frappés, ils sont touchés. Nous sommes en train de mener une lutte pour que cette plaque puisse quitter les lieux, pour qu'on puisse reconnaître officiellement que c'était en réalité l'ancienne place aux enchères.
Despite the painful past the name stirs up, some are still against renaming the square. A local development association says that nothing would be gained by removing reference to the city's biggest slave trader, who was also an influential political figure in the ancient kingdom of Abomey.
Qu'il ait fait du bien ou qu'il ait fait du mal, on ne réécrit pas les pages de l'histoire. Il va falloir immortaliser tous ceux qui ont pris une part de responsabilité quand même dans l'histoire de l'IA.
Since the 90s, the journey taken by thousands of chained Africans has been part of a historical tour. At the end of this road is a warehouse that was used to keep men and women before their departure. It was the last stop before they left their home continent forever. Jeffrey comes from a family of boatmen. His forefathers carried captives to the waiting slave ships. He often comes here to meditate.
Nous étions obligés d'amener les esclaves dans les pirogues vers les bateaux négriers, sinon on est décapité.
Many Beninese still today commemorate their ancestors. The region east of present-day Benin paid a heavy price for the transatlantic slave trade. Before being forced onto ships, most African captives would have followed the voodoo religion. Recently, some believers opened up about a secret aspect of their worship.
La tradition vaudoise choisit d'imprimer cette mémoire à travers la peau des adeptes ici. Par exemple, c'est l'ancêtre d'Arsonan qui a été déporté. Quand nous allons effectuer les cultes qu'il faut, ces adeptes pourront réciter le nom des milliers d'ancêtres qui ont été déportés et dont les noms sont imprimés sur leur corps.
The number of ceremonies evoking the memories of deported Africans have increased over the past 30 years, in part driven by tourists from the diaspora in search of their ancestral identity.
And finally, the director and star of a Nigerian film that was the country's first ever Oscar submission has been invited to become a member of the Academy Motion Picture Arts and Science. That's the body that hands out the coveted Oscar awards. Genevieve Njaji's production, Lionheart, missed out on its shot for Best International Feature Film last year because too much of the dialogue was deemed to be in English. She said that she is honoured to take up the membership, which will mean that she'll be amongst those voting for future Oscar winners. So congratulations, right, from us. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
I'm Natalie Savarikas, and you'll usually find me in news, reporting on Greece's enduring financial turmoil and protests, but also the refugee emergency, here on France 24.
Natalie Savarikas, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.